Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you all so much for being here. I want to thank my colleagues for recognizing the 64th anniversary of Brown v. Board. Unfortunately, by recognition, we might make someone believe that we are going to enforce it. I guarantee you that we are not. We are right now find ourselves in a time where the Secretary of Education really wants to take us back to pre-Brown v. Board days. She is actively undermining public education funding, the equitable distribution of resources, and civil rights protections that by law she is required to uphold. The Secretary and this administration have taken steps to disproportionately harm public schools while increasing funding for private, parochial, and charter schools. It's just kind of like taking from the many and giving to the few. It's taking from poor people and giving it to the rich. That is where we find ourselves today as we continue to disinvest in public education. And if you take that with the purposeful underfunding of the 2020 census and putting questions that may in fact frighten people from filling out the census, so now the resources are going to be even smaller because they are not going to have an accurate count. So I would say that if it were up to the Secretary, poor, minority, disabled children would never be afforded a quality education. A quality education has become the civil rights issue of our time. With that, I would ask Ms. Lehman that your mission into civil rights is to ensure equal access to education. As you mentioned in your testimony, actions taken by OCR seem to suggest an abdication of these responsibilities. What are the legal requirements for OCR regarding enforcement of civil rights law?
Thank you. The requirements for the office are to enforce each of the federal civil rights laws that the Congress has given them jurisdiction over, and each of those laws guarantees that no student shall be subject to discrimination on, for example, the basis of race, sex, ability status. And the office is to share information with the American people, conduct aggressive enforcement to make sure that the rights are actually protected in schools, provide proactive technical assistance to help schools come into knowledge about how to satisfy the law, and where schools are declining to satisfy the law, actually to take the step, the ultimate step of withholding federal funds if the school will not agree to comply moving forward.
Thank you. If demographic data is skewed significantly because of an undercount in the census, how would this impact the disparate impact analysis and enforcement for federal civil rights and equity law?
Well, an undercount of whom our students are, who Americans are, who may have students attending schools will be devastating for our nation's schools, among other components of civil rights. They will receive less funding for the students. They will be less able to actually satisfy students' rights, much less give them educational opportunity. And in fact, the disparate impact analysis, among others, will be much harder to engage in and to follow through with, because that core count of whom we are and who we need to serve as government is crucial to every other aspect of our civil rights.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting to me that we would have a secretary from a party that always talks about we shouldn't pick winners and losers. We pick winners and losers when we decide to not fund fully public education where the majority of the children in this country go. We pick winners and losers when we decide that children should get a better education if they go to a charter school, a private school, or a parochial school. I think that we have not been good stewards of the resources for taxpayers by deciding who wins and who loses. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's absolutely fair, and the notion that there are some children who are worth more than others is anathema to us as a country. It's contrary to all of our core democratic principles, and it is deeply, deeply offensive to the laws that the Department of Education is charged to enforce.
And if these other schools are so good, why don't they share that information with the other schools? If they know so much more and can teach children so much better, why would they withhold that information from the majority of the children? Why would they not make all children receive the same kind of education? You think that's fair?
I do think that's fair, Congresswoman. I'm a believer in transparency for all of us and being able to take best practices and apply them to all places where our children are in school.
Well, I thank you, and I thank you all for being here. But on this 64th anniversary of Brown v. Board, let us remind people that we have never lived up to that standard. I yield back.